Gift, don't forget the gift.
I am free, yeah, come water me. Oh, love you so, but if you don't, I have to leave. Oh no, I am free, yeah, come water me. Oh, love you so, but if you don't.
Well, welcome. Come find a seat. Grab a seat next to someone you like or someone you don't like. It doesn't matter. Glad you guys could be here today. My name is Marty Gilbert. I'm the faculty athletics representative at Mars Hill University. I'm also an associate professor of computer science. I'm one of two administrators serving with Division II Student Athlete Advisory Committee, the group that is essentially responsible for why we're having this session today, about how we can take advantage of the new legislation that lets student athletes use our annual National Election Day for activities other than athletics. I'll be your moderator for this session. We have three all-star outstanding panelists who I'll introduce momentarily. First off, as is customary, right, during all these sessions, take out your cell phone, put it on silent, vibrate something that doesn't disturb your guests beside you. This session is being recorded and will be posted publicly via ncaa.org and the YouTube channel following the convention. So I want to emphasize from the start, right, that we've designed this session to be very conversational, and that conversation includes you. By no means do we hope to talk at you for 60 minutes. We will be prompting you for questions periodically, so please be thinking of specific issues that you would like to be addressed. This past November 8th, as you well know, was Election Day in the U.S. All Division II schools for the first time were required to take a day off from athletics activities, such as games and practices, as a result of legislation we adopted last year at convention that specified that countable athletically related activities be prohibited on Election Day. The goal of the legislation was to increase opportunities for student athletes to participate in civic engagement activities, such as voting and community service. That was evidenced this year as Division II schools promoted various activities that put their student athletes once again at the forefront of positive change. And the legislation came directly from the voice of the student athletes, specifically Division II Student Athlete Advisory Committee, many of whom are sitting right here making funny faces at me this morning. Division II is known for its innovative ideas, and much of that innovation and creativity comes directly from our student athletes. And having been with the Division II SAC for several years, 4 now, I can attest that this group, even though its members may change from year to year, is consistently a positive force, not only in the way Division II governs itself, but also in the way Division II distinguishes itself among the 3 divisions as a thought leader in intercollegiate athletics and higher ed. We are fortunate to have a Division II SAC member on the panel today. DeVaris Cheeks is a football student athlete at Concordia University State Paul. He's a 4th-year undergraduate student studying public relations with a double minor in business management and marketing. DeVaris is highly involved in his campus and community and has brought his leadership to the national stage with the sack. So I'm so pleased he could be with us here today. I had to say that. We also have someone who many of you will recognize because she's been such a contributor to Division II governance over the years, and that is, of course, Anita Barker. She is in her 21st year as the Executive Director of Athletics at Chico State. Anita has served on multiple Division II committees, including Women's Basketball, Management Council, Nominating Committee, and as President of D2 ADA. We will benefit from her perspective today, to be sure. No pressure. Right. We also have with us Chris Barker, the athletics director at Southern Connecticut State University, who was at Wisconsin Parkside prior to that. Chris's NCAA committee service includes having been on the Minority Opportunities and Interest Committee. And again, I'm Marty Gilbert, the FAR at Mars Hill University, a role in which I've had since 2004. And as an FAR, I'm fortunate to interact with student athletes in many different aspects of their collegiate experience. And as most of all of us in this room can attest, they are the reason we love our jobs on most days, right? Especially with the Division II SAC, where you have representatives who are passionate about making a difference for everyone, not just a select few. That's what makes me realize how special our student athletes are and how fortunate we are that they let us hang around with them, and how fortunate they are that I hang around with them. I think this is worded incorrectly. You're really the ones getting the benefit of my presence here. So what do we want to accomplish today? I wish we had more than 60 minutes, but we're going to do our best to address the following themes. How do we get here, right? We're going to look at a brief history lesson of how the current legislation came to be. We want to share success stories and maybe not so successful stories from the first Civic Engagement Day this past November. We want to emphasize the importance of civic engagement as an additional component of the community engagement Division II members are already accustomed to. And importantly, right, we want to recognize that this initiative is once again a result of the student-athlete voice in Division II. So, DeVaris, after that introduction, it should be no surprise that I'm going to start with you. Talk about the impetus behind the idea that led to the legislation that was adopted at last year's convention. Why was it so important to you?
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Yeah, this was a topic that we consistently talk about, especially at the Division II level, just about having a balance. You know, as athletes, we get so caught up in our busy schedules with being athletes, being students, trying to get our homework done, just all the busy things that keep us locked in during the week. So really how this came to light was the lack of participation that we had in voting. I mean, there was always so much going on throughout the week that we were never able to get out in the community on Election Day and go out to the polls and vote because we were so caught up in everything. So that's kind of how it originated. And then the reason that we decided to call it Civic Engagement Day is because not only is this an opportunity to go vote if you wanted to, but also just be engaged in your community on that day. You know, go make an impact, go make a change, because one of our philosophies in Division II is life in the balance. And we take a lot of pride in being able to not only be students and athletes, but also people in our community and serve the communities that we're blessed to be in. So that's kind of how it all came about.
Okay, well, let me follow up on that. So I appreciate the background, but what about Concordia St. Paul at your campus? What did you guys do this past November 8th?
Yeah, so with this being our first official Civic Engagement Day, we had a big plan and then it rained. So that was a little bit unfortunate with the weather, but it really was an opportunity for everyone to make it their own. So first of all, a lot of the student athletes on our campus were able to go out and vote. I mean, our voting numbers skyrocketed just because nobody had practiced that day, no games were going on. Everybody had the opportunity to go, whether it was at 6 in the morning or whenever the polls were about to close. Everybody, for the most part, got a chance to make it to the polls. But specifically at our campus, being in the Twin Cities, right in Minnesota, I'm very happy to be here because the weather in Minnesota is a little cold. So I'm soaking in all of Texas right now. Unfortunately, the death of George Floyd happened about 10 minutes away from my campus. And there's a memorial site right where the event took place. So a lot of my teammates and I, we actually went to the memorial and we helped out a lot with local churches and local food shelters and just helped them like pick up those heavy boxes, get stuff organized, help them clean up the place. Because it really was just an opportunity for us to engage in something that directly impacts our community and the city that we are able to participate in, and the people that come to our games and support us all the time. So it was another chance for us to hopefully gather some more fans and everything for the game. So that's what we did personally.
Chris, we'll stick with the same theme. What were some highlights you'd like to share from Southern Connecticut State?
Yeah, thanks, Marty. You know, it's interesting. So Southern Connecticut State University is a social justice institution. So for us, we're all about upward mobility. That's one of our core values and missions. So for us, there's almost so many things that are going on at the campus level and even within our New Haven community that the challenge for us, and more so the opportunity for us, is how do we engage our students and provide those opportunities to our students and make sure that they're aware of them and can participate in them. So this legislation, obviously, it helped immensely to be able to get our students to it. And I think I'm most proud of the fact that we were able to partner with like our poli-sci department to be able to provide those educational sessions. And I think for us in general, just being able to have the freedom to either do, civic engagement or to be able to attend those education sessions was priceless. And if you don't know, the Northeast 10 had been doing this prior, so this wasn't a first for us as well. So having that day off and have the ability to vote or get involved in the community was exceptional, but also something that we had been doing prior.
Great. Anita, did you find that things went well at Chico State this year, or were there some challenges that you had to work through?
All right, thank you. I'm not as tall. Thanks to everyone for being here. I will say, Chico, like Chris just mentioned, we were part of the CCAA. We are part of the CCAA, and we adopted this as part of our COVID year. So during the 2020 election year, we started it. And part of that, honestly, was an opportunity for our campuses to engage with our student athletes when we were not doing anything. We had a year of no activity in our league, and so it was really easy to get students motivated. Our campus was motivating groups of students to get out to educate their peers on voting. Obviously, it was a presidential election year, which is a lot more attention. And in our community, we are a residential campus. All of our students primarily move from somewhere to come to live in Chico. So it's a little harder when it's not a presidential year to get them excited when there's not a lot that they can see impacting them. So I would say this year did not go well at Chico State. And I don't know how all of you fared this year, but I think the thing that I can take from the year that we feel was really successful is we focused on really trying to educate our students why participation in the process, and this was a campus-wide effort. We literally were door knocking and helping our campus do like hang tags and things like that to just get out and get the word out to get people to vote. Obviously not telling them how to vote, but to get them to engage in their civic responsibility. And I think that is something moving forward that we'll try to do better as we look to next year for this.
Great. Thanks, Anita. We've also collected just a few samples from other institutions that we wanted to show you, just a couple of pictures. We'll run through them real quick, so please direct your attention to that nice small screen over there. And we'll just cycle through these real briefly. If you guys have a great civic engagement day, maybe next year you can send your pictures in and you can be on the big screen. Okay, so in just a few minutes, I'm going to go back here, I think. In just a few minutes, we'll be asking you in the audience, this is the part I was talking about, we're going to ask you what you did on your campuses, right? So be prepared in just a few moments to share your own stories and make them really good, right? There are microphones around somewhere, yeah, so we'll ask in just a second that you go to a mic and share your amazing stories. But for now, one of the things we mentioned in our goals for this session was to discuss how civic engagement is part of the Division II community engagement concept we're all familiar with, but yet it's different, right? Devaris, we'll throw you the softball question, kidding. Can you address the difference between civic engagement and community engagement as you see it to help us better understand this whole thing, since it's so new to us as a day off?
Yeah, that's a great question, and to be completely transparent, I was so confused. I'm like, what's the difference? It's literally the same thing. But while being on the front lines and trying to be an advocate at my specific campus, civic engagement, to make it a little bit easier to understand, is really being active in like the political space. So really the go-to thing to think about would be voting. But also just like different things that impact your city, the place that you live in. Whereas community engagement could be more focused on the people, thinking about like those different groups that are like those different like advocacy groups like mental health and things like that. Like that could be more of like a community engagement initiative, whereas civic engagement is going to be focused more on the city that you live in, the place that you live in, and being active in the political space. So that was kind of the way that I split it up in my head, but by all means, if anyone else on the panel has another way to.
Yeah, Chris, you can feel free to add to that if you'd like.
Yeah, no, Devaris, you're spot on, I think, in a lot of ways. You know, I think I look at it from the education lens, specifically with the Civic, and obviously making sure that our students' voice is heard, you know, the ability to vote. You know, and the community engagement side of it, you know, this really is a great legislative process, right, and more so implementation. This gives our students an opportunity, one, to either have their voice heard or have this education component, you know, added to their life skills. But also then civic engagement can then also be intertwined with community engagement, right? You know, how do you then intertwine alumni in the community, just the general community in general, and bring them into this process to educate our students on what this actually looks like? We're fortunate at our institution where most of our students, you know, are from Connecticut and stay in Connecticut, and even if they're in the Northeast, they stay in Connecticut. So it's important for us to educate them on both sides of that, obviously the community and the civic engagement.
So, you know, as I sat here thinking, especially something Devaris just said, I think a great example for any of you that were at the mental health session earlier today, we talk about how we listen to our student athletes, right? And I think part of civic engagement and part of our responsibility in this space is teaching our student athletes how to use their voice. And I think there's opportunities all over your campuses to connect with folks. And we're going to talk about best practices in a minute. I'm not really leaning into that. What I'm thinking is, like on our campus, we have a very robust student government. But that's those folks across campus, right, that do student government. Our student athletes don't necessarily intentionally have a nexus with that group. And yet, those students are representing their interests on our campus. And I think that's kind of the way, in my mind, I would explain that to our current students, is learning how to use your voice for the daily things that you live in our community. You may not be able to vote in Chico because you're not a resident of Butte County, but the way we're voting in Chico is going to impact your experience while you're a student at our campus, and you have to understand that. And then again, I think another thing that's very top of mind for many of our campuses, ours is an open public campus. So campus safety is a huge issue. Our students wander around campus all day and all night, and they need to have a voice in that safety plan, right? I drive to work every day. I park in a parking lot. I don't know what it's like to walk from 10 o'clock at night to walk across campus to go back to my residence hall. So I think that's where that's where civic engagement goes beyond just the voting responsibility, but engaging in the environment that you are living in. And while you're temporarily on our campuses, we need to hear from you.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Devaris, right, so I can automatically see where this is a potential problem for you. You're a football student athlete. You know, I think about the week leading up to what could be a pivotal game, both for your conference championship or even maybe getting a bid to the Division II championships. Does that change anything from your perspective about this? Maybe you're missing practice on such a pivotal day.
Yeah, that's also a great question. And on behalf of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee with D2SAC, this was something that was really controversial that we had to work through during this process, because it was something that we were thinking about. And in my head, yes, you know, if it's playoffs are coming up and, you know, I have a big practice that day, it just makes me pause and think, like, this game is bigger than myself, and this school that I attend is bigger than myself, and I serve a bigger purpose and a role. And to think, like, yes, I may be losing a day of practice before a really important game, but just thinking back to the fact that the people that I'm competing against are also not going to be practicing that day either. And it's really just taking a moment to realize that we serve a bigger purpose because we're not just student athletes. You know, we serve a bigger role in our community. And honestly, you know, we're always looked to with, you know, a bigger role on our campuses for the most part. You know, like, people look up to us. People come to our games and are inspired by us. So being able to use that in a different way and show people, like, yes, you know, being a student athlete is important to us and something that we're super passionate about. It's also an opportunity to take a look in the mirror and be like, you know, I'm not practicing today. My competition is not practicing today. What can I do to make the best out of this this opportunity? Because that really is what it is. And after asking all of our conferences and all the students around the country how important it was to them, we established this legislation based off of the student-athlete voice. And that's why we're so adamant about keeping this day and making the most of it, because even after our first one, the responses were just so monumental and so impactful for the campuses and the communities.
Let me follow up on that, right? As you know, right, Division I recently adjusted their civic engagement legislation to exempt student athletes that were in season. I know you guys as Division II SAC have had many conversations about that. Can you kind of comment just a little bit on where you guys stand?
Yeah, I think again, we have been talked to about the potential of, hey, even like a sport like volleyball, right? Like that's usually during their championship season, and some schools might want to be practicing or preparing for that big game that's coming up. And when we were getting these different concerns, the committee in its entirety really just went back to the numbers and the votes and what people expressed on the front end of this, because a lot of people expressed how important it was to be active in our community and have an opportunity. A lot of the times as a student athlete, it's nice to be able to get a day of rest, honestly, but also just have an opportunity to show people why it's so important. And, there's not to say that the landscape might not change, but while it is the way that it is, I know for a fact that Division II is going to make the most of the opportunity with the day dedicated to civic engagement because of how passionate student athletes are across the board. So,
great, thanks, Tavares. And Chris and Anita, I haven't forgotten about you, I promise. This session is about best practices, and you guys have been doing this for more than just this year, actually. So can both of you talk about the planning that should go into what will be conducted, and what other types of advice you'd give to your peers out there? Who wants to arm wrestle to start there? Chris, you want to start us?
And Anita and I are not related, by the way, just so everyone knows. I thought you were going to...
You missed my joke.
Yeah, we don't know yet. No, I think first and foremost, obviously, this comes down to intentionality. This day is important for so many reasons, but also then articulating the value and why we're really doing this. For my experiences, and whether it be with DEI planning and just programming in general, you talk about how do you create collaborative practices, right, that are intentional. And it does start with a plan, right? I know my experiences with all this has really been 6 months out. You try and get that plan started. And that's not a magic number. We all know that in college athletics, there is no magic number, right? But on my campus, really, again, the challenge that I have is how do I make sure I capture everything that's going on my campus and in the surrounding communities. But I like to have a running list. That's one of the things that I think works best for me, just with like alumni engagement. We laughed on our call when we prepped for this. Everyone knows when homecoming is, right? Everyone knows when those certain milestone dates are. Why can't you do that with this? And I think about this as administrators, as student athletes, one of the biggest pet peeves we have is lack of communication, right? So when you plan, you communicate, and you articulate the reasons why and what you're going to do, that's intentionality, right? And that's how you execute these things, or at least attempt to execute these things in the best way. But for me, it really is having a master list, and it's a part of that master list for all of our programmatic needs and things that we're going to try and accomplish in that academic year.
So I think this is one of those opportunities where we talk about athletics at our campuses, engaging with the campus and campus community, and embedding our student athletes in the fabric of what goes on our campuses. And I think this is an example of how we do that, right? There are experts all over campus who do this for a living, they're faculty members that are already doing engagement programming for getting out the vote. That was the program we were involved with at Chico State during the election year. It was literally called Getting Out the Vote. And it was because in the CSU system, there was a ballot bowl, and I don't think we got a prize, but we got our name on a big screen in front of the CSU system that said that Chico State beat San Diego State in the ballot bowl. That's a big deal, right? And all it was getting our students, not our student athletes, but getting our students out to vote. And that looked like regular education sessions. How do you get registered to vote. It wasn't, now think back, fall of 2020, little polarized we were as a country. It wasn't who you're going to vote for. It was register to vote. And it became a competition, and it was super fun, and it was us working with our Office of Community Engagement on campus. So that would be my best practice, is seek out those experts that are already doing this as part of their professional job or passion, and plug into that. And that won't, and then therefore it won't become an add-on to something that we have to create out of the athletic department.
Great, thanks, Chris and Anita both. And just anecdotally, I like to share some of our own experiences at Mars Hill University. You know, I knew this legislation was coming. Obviously, it was passed, you know, almost a year prior to when the date took place. And I thought, well, you know, I'll contact our Office of Community and Civic Engagement. They're experts at this. But I thought, yeah, sure, 3 or 4 weeks should be plenty of time to make this happen. Spoiler alert, right? It is not enough time, and Mars Hill is in a very rural area, and come to find out, the people in that rural area are very civically engaged. So I thought we'd have 400 athletes down at the polls handing out waters, and you know, there was no need. There weren't open positions, right? For a community that is our size, bringing 400 student athletes down to the polls would not have been a good outcome, right? And so I think Chris, when he was talking, and in our prep calls as well, he mentioned, you know when homecoming is. It's a year in advance planning, right? And I think that next time we do this, it's going to be something that I put on our calendar a lot more in advance and involve those constituencies and experts on our campus as they are. So yeah, it's not all rosy, right? There were lots of struggles and lots of good and problems we ran into this year. But like I promised earlier, you've had about 10 minutes or so to think, right, at this point in time. I want to check in with our audience. What did you do on your campus? What are you excited to tell us about ideas we can steal, borrow and use on our own campuses, right? So there's a microphone in the middle right there, and there's one here in the front. And I know everybody's lining up. Don't push, don't shove. Do we have somebody that would like to share some of their best practices, what they did on their campus and how it worked for them? Tons. Don't push. Excuse me, sir. Don't push that lady. Nobody? Does that mean we had more struggles than we had successes on our campus this year? Fair enough. Our first time. Yes. Yeah, there's a mic right here or back there, just so we can all hear you, if you don't mind. Thank you. It was very awkward. I didn't know what to do next.
Jessica Velasco, Sorrel State University, and I'm a professor of political science and public administration, so I kind of feel obligated to get up here. So what we did, we focused really on all the steps. So voting is just the end of the process. And so we got engaged with the National Voter Registration Day, which happens every year in September. We also had several events where we would have people meet to go vote. We organized buses to go take students to vote. And then, of course, on voting day, we did a big, don't forget to go vote. And I sent out lots of information about what's on the ballot, here are sample ballots, and really helped kind of get people, because just showing up to vote, that's really, it's overwhelming and intimidating to students if they're not registered, first of all, because they're going to get turned away in Texas. And you have to be registered, and there's different rules in all the states, y'all know that. And so, especially in Texas, you have to have a good plan, and you have to do it in advance. And so, really worked on all of those steps. And in addition, I want to make a little plug. We tried to get a grant for something called Motivote, which is an online platform that really helps, and it creates competitions. And it's not an app, but it's an online platform where it really helps students through all the steps. And it gives them little reminders like, hey, have you made a plan? When are you going to go? And it gives them little incentives that they can cash in points at the bookstore and stuff like that. We're hoping to use that in the next election cycle. But yeah, so that's what we did.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else like to share? Sharing is caring. It's a hard crowd. This is recorded. I'm sorry. Let me behave. Oh, you got something for us, Wiley?
Here, I'll save Marty like I do in the meetings and stuff like that. Hi, Wiley Kane. I'm a Division II football student athlete at Kentucky Wesleyan College. Just introduce myself like I do in SAC. I actually wanted to share, I represent the entire Great Midwest Athletic Conference on Division II SAC. So as part of preparing for this Civic Engagement Day, we had a conference SAC call where it was 3 days before, it was 3 days before, and we also had one a month before where we talked about ideas. The month before was ideas, and then 3 days before was asking people for updates on their ideas. So I actually wanted to share one from a school in my conference. So Tiffin University, which is in Tiffin, Ohio, had a day where they went to all 4 elementary schools in their city around Tiffin, Ohio, and asked them if they would be able to send students to Tiffin, Ohio for the Civic Engagement Day. And so what happened was all 4 schools sent at least some students, and 3 out of the 4 schools sent all of their 4th and 5th grade students to Tiffin University, and they put on a day in the gym where they had a mock election for the 4th and 5th graders. They had a political science professor who shared why it's important to vote, why it's important to learn how to vote. They talked to the kids about it. They let the kids vote on favorite color of favorite flavor of ice cream and favorite color and all kinds of stuff like that. But they went through the entire process. They had the ballot. They had people giving them directions to the ballot box and things like that. So it was really cool how they entwined civic and community engagement in that way, because they were teaching these young elementary school kids about how important it is to use their vote. And then afterward, they gave the kids who came the opportunity. They gave them free tickets to their Tiffin football game that was on Saturday, and they were actually playing for a conference championship that Saturday. So it was kind of funny in that way. But so the kids showed up and they were able to get recognized at halftime for having completed the civic engagement, the voter instruction. So I thought that was really awesome, and I personally told the Tiffin SAC members hey, we're stealing that for my school next year. So borrowing that for our school next year.
That's right. What a great example. Thanks, Wiley. You actually said something meaningful this time, which is rare. Now that's forever on YouTube. You can go back and listen to that later. That was really great. And we'll have another opportunity at the end of this to ask questions. Maybe instead of sharing best practices, maybe the questions section will be a little bit more lively there. But back to the panel, right? I have a question for Anita because she is wise beyond her years. No pressure. We talked about how this impacts student athletes in season. How have you handled that with your coaches?
Translates to old, Marty. Well, I have to, full disclosure, be honest. I wasn't a big fan of this legislation, to be honest with you, as a professional. And the reason was because I didn't feel like we needed another legislative piece to do the right thing. That said, I think what this legislation has done is put our money where our mouth is, right? And I think it's our job as administrators to just remind the coaches. We get those groovy books, and at the end of each legislative piece, it says intent. And I think that's the key to this with the coaches, is having them understand the intent behind the legislation. We talk a lot about developing student athletes that are good citizens. So we're putting our money where our mouth is. And so, similar to what Chris has said, similar to what Marty said, we know about this for the next decade. You can look on the calendar and figure out where election day is. So plan accordingly. I'm pretty certain that most of us did not plan for the FAA to shut down yesterday and us to miss our flight. And we made it here anyway, and we figured it out. So if we say that we're resilient and we can pivot and we can do what we do in college athletics, we can certainly adjust for a day that matters to our student athletes. And so that's kind of the way I would talk to my coaches.
Thank you. Chris, I know your conference has been doing this for a while. So does the NE10 have any resources or tools that they give to the institutions in their conference?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, in terms of the social media side of that, they obviously send that out, platforms, ways that we can get that word out, and obviously that message and that story of the student athletes, what they're doing on that day. But something interesting that you all might want to look at, it's an organization called All Vote No Play. It's nonpartisan. Julie Rupert has done a good job, collaborating with them, but also fostering that relationship for our conference. But it's also something that you all may want to take a look at, because again, it does create those opportunities for education for your students and also your staff as well. And just to double down again what Anita said about the communication, I'm fortunate, and I know Anita is too, to have people that they work work with in their previous or current institutions that understand that value of what Division II is. So if we can't even value this one day and take a pause, we need to really think about working in Division II, because this really is special, and it really is the intent and the right intent of what we're doing and the core value of Division II.
Thanks, Chris. So we are getting close to the end of our time, right? And as I said earlier, I wish we had another couple hours to talk about this, but I wanted to make sure we had made good on our promise, right, to share some best practices that people can implement on their campuses right away to make a difference next year, right? And I think Anita touched on this earlier, right? Next year's election day doesn't have the same weight as this past year, nor the one in 2024. So what can we offer attendees to take back to their campuses? In other words, what would you say is the one thing they should leave with today that are the practical ways and they can address it on their own campuses? Chris, you want to start us off?
You didn't want to go with my younger sister, Anita.
No, your
That's
younger
fine. No, I go back to the intentionality piece. Put this on the calendars, communicate that effectively. But also, there's no right or wrong way to do this. This is somewhat new, right? So something's better than nothing. I think sometimes we're hypercritical of our actions and our programs, when in all reality, if you do something, I say it to my staff all the time, 1% better every day. If you just do something with this and take away that you can communicate this with your staff, and at least also ask the student athletes what do they want to do. Because, show of hands real quick, how many people in this room can read my mind? Go on, put your hands up. A bunch of mind readers. Tough crowd. No one raised their hand, right? Because no one knows what's going on if you don't ask the question. So ask the question and then build your plan and be intentional about it. That's the best advice and best practice I would give.
Anita, you, and then DeVaris, if you want to close that part up.
I would just go back to, what I said a little bit ago, and we heard from a faculty rep that is exactly the type of person that you're going to look for on your campus, right? Find your faculty friends, find the departments on campus that do this work every day, and find out where needs are. Whether, instead of, I think we get so stuck in trying to figure it out ourselves, and that sometimes can paralyze you. I think reaching out and finding out where those needs will be around that first week of November in the community where your campus is, and maybe you can come up with something for this year that maybe isn't as easy, or I shouldn't say easy, as big of a platform as it will be when we get into a presidential election year. But there still are civic needs all the time. So that's where I would start, is look for folks that can be allies on campus that you can plug into that are already doing this work.
Yeah, both of those points are great, and I guess I can just kind of echo both in closing by saying, kind of like Chris said, ask the students what they want to do. The main reason why this legislation passed is because student athletes were so adamant about being able to use their voice and use their platform and make positive changes in the communities that they serve in, the communities that they're passionate about, and the communities that support them on their game days. So if you ask them, what do you guys want to do for Civic Engagement Day, they're probably going to be like, I don't know. But figure out what they're really passionate about. What drives them, what motivates them every day to be in those other clubs or organizations that they're in, or the different involvement on campus. What makes them into the leaders that they are? Those things that they're passionate about are things that they can take full advantage of and really make a significant impact, not only on their campus, but on their community. So I just really preface to ask the students. The student athlete voice is so pivotal, and especially in today's climate. And I know that a presidential election is different than a midterm election, but what Anita said as well, civic engagement, community engagement, all these different things, they're not going anywhere. And student athletes are really passionate about it, and it's what makes us different and bigger than ourselves. So,
great, thank you, DeVaris. A novel idea, right? Let's talk to the student athletes. So here's your chance to shine, and I'll be honest, you kind of let me down with a couple of exceptions, right, last time. So what questions do you have? This is a panel of experts. This is your time to ask questions about how you can approach this on your campus and make this meaningful for both your students and your community. It says questions on the slide. Okay. There we go. Got a couple of people. Good. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mads.
I thought you were being serious. Okay, well, I'm Mads McKenna. I'm a former D2 National SAC rep. And I, like Marty, was in the room when we first started to talk about what our place as National SAC was in getting this ball rolling in July of 2019. And with the small exception of maybe Marty and I and a couple of my peers, the overwhelming response was, that's not our place. We're not just student athletes, but essentially we're just student athletes. We don't want to get political. We don't want to get involved in this and like make people pick sides, Quickly, that has changed, which I'm excited to see in this group of all-stars taking that into their hands now. Could any of you guys talk to that point of why this might be our responsibility, why we do have a foot in this space, and kind of the role that you think that we can play as individuals in athletics to really make it yours and make this important to us?
DeVaris, I'll go to you first if you want to field that.
No, that's a great question, Mads, and I can remember when a lot of people are like, that's not really my place, like I'm just a student athlete. I'm sure some of you may have heard like my vote doesn't really make a difference in what's going to be the outcome, and I know Anita touched on it earlier, and that's why education is so important, because every vote can make a difference, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be about voting either, too. Like this day was dedicated to civic engagement. While yes, that is a big priority, it's really up for anything. And a lot of the priorities, especially within SAC, we're advocates. We're advocates for not only making the best student athlete experience, but part of that experience is making sure that we're heard and we're felt, and we can address the things that impact us, whether it's, the way that we're made, where we came from, different things that impact our everyday lives is going to impact our student athlete experience as well. Those things like mental health, those things, all those different things that you hear about on a consistent basis and are passionate about, those are the things that we can hit on and target on a day like Civic Engagement Day. And I really, to be transparent, a lot of the uproar did come from that 2020 election, while it was crazy everywhere. But just thinking about how much of an impact that voice can make in today's landscape is huge. With social media and everything as well, it's really impactful. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my input.
Either of you guys would like to weigh in on that as well, or?
I would just say that just because the word civic is in it doesn't mean it has to be political, right? And I think that is, if you go back to the fall of 2020, really what many of us on college campuses were doing was trying to impress upon 18 to 22-year-olds that you do need to vote, that your vote will matter. And that doesn't matter what political party you are or what, which way you're going to vote. And I think those of us that work on campus and even, tangentially were involved in that work, that was the pushback we were getting was, well, you're trying to, tell my student how to vote. No. We want them to participate in their responsibility as an adult in the United States of America. That's what we want. And so I think if you kind of talk it at that lens, it maybe tamps down the political piece again. However, civic means there are issues that you're dealing with. So that is going to mean people have sides. So I think it helps you understand how to research, understand, have a position on an issue so that you, whatever side issue you're passionate about, you're educated about it.
And I think just to follow up, Madison was a great question, but I'm looking at my guy over here with a great bow tie and some tennis shoes, make it yours, right? That's Division II. So I think, again, I go back to the fact that, doing something's better than nothing, but don't be afraid to do something and try it. There's no wrong way to do civic engagement, right? I mean, I'm sure there is, but let's not go into those boundaries, right? But think about that. Just do something, be somewhat creative, but have it put your stamp on it. I know schools in our conference did that, and it was really fun to see what they did. Adelphi was one of them. I knew New Haven did their own thing, and we did our own thing. But you get to interpret this legislation in a couple different ways, which is unique and creative. But if that's not the epitome of Division II, I don't know what is.
I'll weigh in briefly. You know, those conversations, it was verboten, right? We thought the idea of civic engagement was just something that we didn't want to touch as a student athlete advisory committee. But then, you know, the guiding principles of what we have right now are total package student athlete, and it has all these principles. And if that's not a piece of being a total package student athlete and total package person, right? I think Anita said, you know, at my school, our hope is that we generate good citizens. And that means, part of that means being civically engaged. Again, not for one platform or the other, but that you are educated and engaged on that. So I think after that we kind of viewed it through that lens, it was almost how can we not get involved in this, right? It's good. Do we have another question back here? No? Yeah, please, sir.
Good afternoon. Chris Snyder, Director of Athletics, Seton Hill University. Clearly, this is such an important issue to the student athletes. And my question, I guess, is more curiosity for our SAC and our FARs that are in here. If it is such a vital issue to take the day on, if you will, to have time to go to the polls and to be engaged civically, what steps are being taken on your campuses to not have class that day and have the whole day off? Thank you.
I'm all for it. I'll cancel my classes. It's an excellent point, right? I guess this may be a good case of athletics leading the way when it comes to, you know, demonstrating how important it is. But I don't know if on your campuses, if you have canceled classes that day or, yeah, go ahead, DeVaris.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know what it is for other institutions, but my school personally does have no class that day either. You know, sometimes that depends on your professor, but I know that our institution makes sure that we don't have class. However, I do think, to your point, it is important for us to take steps, right? Like, I think being able to be an advocate for that is so much more tangible now because, like, if I were a student passionate about having this big day on, as you mentioned, being able to go up to, you know, the president of the university, academic advisor, whoever I have to talk to and be like, hey, like, it's literally a rule within the NCAA or whatever that we don't have practice or games this day for election day. So I think that we should advocate for not having class either. I think it's a lot easier to do that now because this legislation is passed. But again, I can't really totally relate just because I know that my school does take that day off, but it really is intentional to become a day on and not just sleep in and, you know, stuff like that.
Chris, you or Anita want to address that as well, or?
No, I'm fortunate to work at an institution that believes in that, obviously. And again, our conference is pretty good about that. I can't speak for obviously what they do. But it does start at top with your president, you know, and be able to have those conversations. And I think this legislation does, you know, strengthen that, obviously. But also, you know, it's an excuse. We're not doing athletics that day, so why can't we not go to class, right? So that's just my 2 cents on it, but I'm spoiled on that side.
Anita, you have something for us? Okay. Any other questions out there? Please, yeah, again. It's me.
I have a suggestion, actually, for the students. On our campus, I don't know how accessible the polls are to all your campuses. It depends, I guess, on how big your community is. We did have an election polling place on our campus one year, and then it went away because not enough students showed up. But I know a big part of that was very critical in us even getting it that year was having students go to our elections administrator and advocate for it. So I think you guys have a great opportunity to go and make it even more accessible to the students on your campus, and then it just makes it easier for everybody if it's right there. So just wanted to give you that idea.
Great, thank you, great. Any other questions or comments?
Good afternoon, Chauncey Winbush, Athletic Director, Shepherd University. So I think, as we all know, student athletes are pulled in many different directions, whether academically or socially, and obviously athletically. So I'm trying to figure out how we can get through the challenge of, you know, the voluntold. Obviously, we know that this is critical, this is important, but you're going to have some student athletes and some programs that are going to be really engaged, and then you're going to have some that may not. So can you give us some ideas on how to strongly encourage or get more activity from those student athletes that may not be as engaged?
Anybody want to field that one first? Sure, take off.
That's a great question, and as a D2 SAC member, we talk about that term voluntold a lot, and it's something that we strongly advocate against. But to that regard, I think one of the main things is being proactive instead of reactive, right? Like the forward education leading up to the event, as you mentioned, like it's a day that you can mark your calendar a few months in advance, but some people, even this past year, just because it's so new and to the light, like just talking within my conference, they're like, we had students at our school that were just asking coaches, like, why do we have a day off? They had no idea. So I think just the informational piece, the education, that's why it's so crucial, especially for planning like bigger events, bigger opportunities and initiatives. Like, Wiley, thanks for sharing that example, because I don't think they were able to set up, that big of a event in the gym with, 5th and 6th grade, whatever it was, in a day, right? Like it does take a little bit of intention, and I think that's probably one of the most important things leading up to it.
Chris?
Yeah, Chauncey, it's a great question. That notion of voluntold, we hear it all the time as, former student athletes, administrators, coaches. I think a big piece of it is showing students, and being there involved with them, and I do go back to student athlete surveys. I think that's huge because you're actually getting their voice. But that's where you really need SAC to be strong, and when I go and visit SAC, it's the intentionality around that and actually getting that across. Why are we doing these things? It's my expectation at the end of the day, but explaining why it's my expectation. And I'm sure you do that, obviously. But I do think it's important to make sure that those students understand that. And SAC is your byproduct, right? I think you know that. And I think all administrators in this room do understand that. So if they can go back to their teams and have that communication, and the coaches, again, for me, that's the expectation side of it. But for our students, it's understanding of the opportunity and how it grows and develops them as people, in my opinion.
Anita?
I was just going to say you can't do that. I don't think you can force them to engage. But I go back to, and I'm full disclosure, I'm not going to sit up here and say that we have been super effective at this, but I think as I listen to all the different folks that have talked, I think again, I'm going to find out who that faculty rep is over there. I think, tapping the shoulders of the experts to help them get you started and help it become part of the fabric of what you do in the department, and start small. I think I love the Tiffin idea, but oh my goodness, if we started out trying to do that, it would be a huge failure because we don't have that mindset yet. So I think shift in the mindset first, educating and engaging with those platforms that are already happening on your campus, and then pivot to getting something for the program going, has a better road for success. But I think it's like everything else we do. If you do a community service event, you're probably not forcing students to participate in that. So I think you have to think of that the same way. But we do want everybody to exercise their right to vote. We can't force it.
Yeah, just one more piece to add to that. That's a really good point. It's just, again, I totally agree with that too. It's like, it's an opportunity for people to participate. And I think, Chris, you mentioned something earlier. It's like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and we're like, I'm on the football team. I got 130 people on my team, and if we're not 130 for 130, like, we failed, or it wasn't mandatory enough, or I think even having 20 people there is better than 0. And that's where I think it comes to light, and realizing that we made an impact today, and it might not have been this huge breakout, viral video, whatever, but there was something there instead of nothing there, and that's progress and a foundation to build off of for years to come. So.
I think Chris said earlier, 1% better, right? Every. So I can't thank the panelists and you as a mostly engaged audience. The people up here were a little suspect. But for all your ideas and insight today, we hope that you've learned a few things that you can take back to your campus to strengthen or enhance what you already do to conduct civic engagement activities going forward. Don't forget to join the conversation on social media, right, using the NCAA CONV hashtag or the # for those of us that are a bit older. Pound sign's the thing, never mind. And to follow at Inside the NCAA on Twitter for updates throughout the convention. Additionally, please complete the brief session survey, on the NCAA convention app. The NCAA Events app can be downloaded from the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. And to access the survey, you just click on the session title in the app's NCAA agenda. From there, click Survey. Complete the brief 3-question survey and comment about how excellent the moderator was today. That wasn't on my notes. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and as always, make it yours.